Awesome. Hold on. Let me get rid of a few of those bits and those bits and those. Fantastic. To ask the obvious question, can anybody or everybody hear me, please?
I can, Mark, but I'll wait for others to say who've just been
Awesome.
admitted.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I have, as you know, if you've ever been in my courses, thank you, Paul. One time I was going over some really exciting stuff, and it was only when I got a phone call that realized for the last half an hour nobody could hear me. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for coming. I mean, this is your lunch hour. It's a busy January, so I feel so blessed that you come along to listen to little me. And it'd be informal. So yeah, if you have any questions, please say it on to the Q&A or the chat, and to kind of say, if there's any other topics you like to hear discussion on in the future. I'm kind of thinking some of the weird esoterics in our industry, like electric versus gel, or where screening comes into netting, something like that. I'd be willing, obviously, to do another one, and of course, it's free. So so let us know. I said, thanks so much for coming. My name's Mark Wayman. I'm sure I've met some of you, if not all of you, before. I kind of have responsibility for Birds for Network, part of PELSIS. I'm the technical guy, so nothing more than going out on site discussing about birds and looking at surveys, etc. So I'm here kind of hopefully helping you today. And with me I have David Bortwood, my colleague. David is very knowledgeable in bird also, and I've had some cheese for lunch, so David will be my wingman, wing person. First bird joke. And David's very knowledgeable in bird and manages the south for us. And also Linda. Linda oversees the marketing for us, and we'll be doing all the whizzy stuff today. And if I do lose anything, then Linda has a presentation as well. So that's awesome. So yeah, welcome. There's a lot I'm going to go through. There's not been many changes on the law, but what I want to do is kind of take you through the journey, as they say, from the kind of beginning. There might be some stuff even the most learned of you, and I know some really experienced people here. You might kind of learn, you might go, wow, didn't know that. I'll go through some of the esoterics as well and lead on to different stuff. And we will send you. Oh, Phil, that's no problem at all. Said, as long as you can see me, that's the main thing. And there will be some follow-up sort of literature, if you want to call it that, to kind of back this up afterwards. So at least you have something to refer to as well. So what I will do, to get started, share my screen. I said, please do use the chat and the Q&A. Yeah, Linda will shout out to me if there's anything you want to ask, so I can then go into it. So thank you. So let me do this. Let me do that. And if I may ask somebody to say if they can see this, please. You can shout out to me. And you see this, team? David, would you mind saying, please?
Yes, Mark. It's all getting thumbs up, so everyone can see.
Wonderbar. Is that actually launched? For some reason, it's not launching.
You're on the second slide. Just hit the
Yeah, it's not launching, so I don't want to spend too much time if it's not launching, but can you see it, yeah?
You can see it, yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So yeah, it's going to be bird law changes and the relevance, because obviously, lots of statute exists. We kind of nod to it, but sometimes we don't really know what it means. So I'm going to go through that. I'm going to start off in Europe. We are still part of Europe, no matter what Brexit said. Come down to local national laws. And I'm going to kind of jump between different parts of the UK to kind of show you the idiosyncrasies and differences. And let's move on to the second slide. And I hasten to add on this, I didn't put at the beginning of the slide, the Robin is okay, but don't worry, the Robin is okay. So you kind of may have asked, why did I do this? I've kind of done plenty of webinars and stuff, not always for the UK. And I think, it's a very valuable topic for us to get updates and to remind us. The ramifications of it going wrong could be very serious. But also, there's a couple of things that kind of happened a couple of weeks ago. And the first one on this one, and the Robin is okay, by the way, as I said, I got a phone call from an old colleague, and two things that kind of put a chill down my spine. He goes, Mark, I think I have a dead robin. Oh, gosh. And secondly, our robins on the general license. So those two things maybe go, oh, dear. So I asked some more questions, and essentially, Robin was flying around went into a window, and you're probably aware there's certain small species pretend they're dead, maybe to stop cats, etc., getting them. So the robin was okay. He was kind of pointing to it, and it did revive and go. So that was awesome. The second question was, of course, yeah, robins, and we come on to that, are not on the licensing, but actually in England, in Wales-ish, they're on a class license. So there is something. So a great discussion, I thought, to kind of bring it up. So very nice, Robin. And hopefully this is scheduled through. And I'm a bit mean because David, my awesome colleague, I've not prepped him up. So I was going to ask you, David, would you mind sharing what type of dove or pigeon these are, please? Any guesses?
Yeah, so top left stock dove,
Ooh,
I believe
nice.
top middle feral pigeon,
Awesome.
right coloured picture wood pigeon, the collared
Respect.
dove,
Nice.
and is it a fantail?
Ooh, yes. So it's a very pretty pigeon. So yeah, fantail. So thank you so much. And that was, forgive me again for kind of jumping that onto you. But yeah, it's kind of implicit whenever we look at, obviously I'm going to be particularly looking at lethal methods, which we lead on to, that we need to know our birds. And gone are the times when I first started sort of 31 years ago, where, as we used to say, is it a little brown jobby, i.e. a sparrow, or is it big? If it's big, okay. If it was small, still have reservations. Of course, that's long gone. So now we have to be very, very clear. My kind of, I suppose my first bit of advice to you, and then kind of moving on to the next slide, that's moved through, is, and I come on to the laws, etc. If you're not sure, stop. If you don't know, get advice. Phone me, phone your manager, phone your colleague, phone your friends. And as the saying goes, it's the person that either pulls or squeezes the trigger, however it now is in law, is the one that will be held to account. And believe me, it will go to court. I've been involved in a couple of kind of near misses, shall we say. And it could be, and if you kind of add up the, not 5 gold rings, but the 5 Canada geese and the 5 parakeets, that's £5,000 fine per bird. So £50,000 in total, and said it would go to court. And more like your company will be involved in that, the customer will be involved in that, any other interested parties will be involved in that as well. So, and I hasten to add today's advice, but yeah, there would be advisors that could get involved in that. We kind of start with the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and that's the overruling law, and a pretty good law because it's been around for 40 odd years, which normally statute gets changed quite often, doesn't it? And kind of leading on to the small writing there, hopefully you can see that in the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and other parts that come out with that. Animal Welfare Act essentially means, and you're probably aware of this, that as soon as we become involved with animals, and if you have a pet at home, that would be implicit onto that. If you're a farmer, that would do as well. And us in integrated bird management or pest control, every time we come into contact with an animal, a bird, a mouse, we are beholden under the Animal Welfare Act about how we treat it. And there's no get out. We're completely responsible for that. So just kind of make you aware of the different things that we could be beholden to. It's a shame this doesn't launch because I can't get it to launch, but to kind of look at this slide here, the awesome way to start being the fact that there's hundreds of potential birds that could come into the UK at any one time. Even just one that comes over. All wild birds, their active nests and their eggs are protected. And that's a great way to start, isn't it? Rather than every month or every day listing the birds that are here in the UK, and some bird spotter spots a new bird, you have to add it. So all birds are protected. And way back, and I always joke that kind of 30 odd years ago when I started, maybe some techniques are different, but actually pigeons and gulls are pretty much the same. They've not kind of mutated in any way. But before we had European Birds Directive that gave oversight to the UK. That started in 79. They re-amended it again 30 years later, mainly because the countries in the European Union changed and some birds changed. I'm going to show one slide on it. I've read it a couple of times when I was in the Republic of Ireland, when I was doing some other stuff in sort of Europe, France and Germany. It's really complicated, really onerous. So being how we are in the UK, we decided back in 92 under the MAF, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Foods, we said, no, we don't like it. It's too complicated. We go our own way. And if you were kind of around then, as some of you were, when I come on to what's called licensing, which is kind of lethal methods, they were pretty much the same. There's a feral pigeon in every part of the UK. There's a sparrow in every part of the UK. And by the way, back then you could actually remove sparrows and starlings. Then it kind of carried on, and we brought out the licensing, as I said, which you're familiar with now, and I'll go through. And then I'm not going to comment on it, but World Justice, Chris Packham and his two colleagues challenged the bird licenses in 2019, leading on, started with England and moved on to the other parts of the UK. And that led to some quite wholesale changes, which we're still kind of feeling now, if you compare to how the licenses was back then. So that's kind of the history, I suppose. The Wildlife and Countryside Act, as I mentioned, is the oversight for the law. And I'm sure stuff you do in general pest control, you know, comes out of that, like glue boarding, etc. I shouldn't mention that, should I? And each part of the UK, within reason, makes its own laws for anything that's wildlife or countryside. And I'll show that. But as you know, if you're kind of traveling across different parts of the UK, which some of you do, just be aware of the changes, that some birds are authorized in one part, not authorized in others, and that's really changed a lot. I go through what's called general licenses. I always liken this to kind of a speed limit on the road outside. The speed limit outside is 30 miles an hour. I don't have to apply for that. I have to be competent, trained, and follow all guidance when I'm driving. So that's what it is, and I'll go into that. That's for lethal consideration normally. For England, sort of in Wales, we have class licenses. That's for food, predominantly food. It has to be all food. It can't just be, I don't know, your office where you're giving out some sweets. It has to be predominantly food. And also aerodromes. Most parts of the UK have revoked aerodromes because if you think about going into an airport, like jumping in an airport in Liverpool and doing lethal methods, it's pretty onerous. And then we have what we used to call the special licenses, but essentially in each part of the UK, it's applicable to you. So me, Mark Wentman, will get a license for doing certain things for a limited period of time. And you're probably aware when I talk about goals, that's really restricted now. And because some of these you don't have to apply for, like the general licenses, I suppose there'd be lots of things I kind of say that take out of this, but the main thing is please, 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 and I do it regularly. They're quite nicely written, actually. They're written in really plain English. Read these really carefully, understand the conditions, particularly things like SSSI, Sites of Special Scientific Interest, where you are, where you're working. So yeah, you don't want to fall foul of some super esoteric. So hopefully that's moved on to the bird law in Europe. I said I won't dwell on this, but if you do travel out of the UK to Republic of Ireland, Southern Ireland, or luckily into Europe, there are a lot of differences because we've had a lot of birds removed from our licenses. In the UK, they're quite similar now. I used to say, wow, it's really tight on bird law in the Republic of Ireland. It's pretty much the same. So I would just say, yeah, if you do go over there, just obviously read up on the law. I won't dwell anymore. So this is the UK. As already mentioned, it says that you can consider the use of lethal methods, but, and I go on to all the buts, each part of the UK, and by the way, there's not going to be no quiz or anything afterwards, so I wouldn't be mean enough to do it. Normally it's be part of some of my courses, a bit quiz, but Scotland is Nature Scot, that's part of the government that oversees wildlife, etc. We have Natural England or DEFRA in England. I won't go into why and which, but there's been a little bit of incompetency there. Natural Resources, Wales and DAERA in Northern Ireland. So they do make their own. And there's quite a lot of differences between it, how they approach different parts. I want to come on to, and I'll show you the general licenses in detail. Essentially, it says, what's the reason why? And when we come on to it, the main reason we normally look at is for public health and public safety. And you think about all the nasty things a feral pigeon can do, pretty much apart from it looking at me not very nicely or sitting on the top of my car and taunting me, all the things they're doing could cause disease, slips, trips and falls, etc. So that's that. Under license, it does actually list the species. Now, I've already mentioned feral pigeon, but obviously there's very specifics. It says who an authorized person is, and I'll say about that. And some of the methods, and we already know about some of the methods as well. So that's for general licenses. And because I can't launch this, may I just ask you, David, esteemed colleague, these are all lethal methods. What do we have to do prior to going in to a site and consider lethal methods or even enact a lethal method? What do we have to have done? What's best practice, please?
You'd need to explore all non-lethal methods, first of all. So if there is an option to do proofing, form of netting, spikes, abbey shock, whatever the case may be, or scaring, another option. So as long as you've explored all non-lethal methods first, the lethal method should be sort of the last choice, as it were. So
fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's absolutely perfect. Yeah, it's one of these things that it is best practice. If we forget about what the law is, and somebody did say to me prior to Brexit, when we leave the European Union, does it mean we can do what we want with birds? And it's no, of course not. This is morally right. It's ethically right. It's completely right. So on this one here, thank you again, David. I've got kind of historically. And I've got now, and I don't know if it's kind of pre-pack and post-pack, and I won't be clever enough to say that, but essentially it's what changed palpably when the laws were revoked and reinstated again. And historically, it essentially means, as you kindly said, David, you have to do everything non-lethal first and prove it's either ineffective or impractical. So ineffective could be, again, this is not what happened, but as an example, you could go into a large train station full of pigeons, clap your hands. That didn't work, but I tried scaring. So that's ineffective. Impractical, look, you need to net the whole of an airport, individual concourses to stop pigeons coming in. It's impractical, isn't it? And it wouldn't work. So what kind of thing on that one is there's no proportionality. So the new, which is kind of now, essentially says there is now proportionality. And it's kind of a bit of a double negative English on this, but essentially it means if you have a couple of loafing gulls on a roof, you can do, and they're not nesting, of course, you can try minimal sort of efforts to move it on because there's only one or two. You can go there with a colleague. As an example, by the way, going there with a colleague. If there was hundreds of loafing gulls, hundreds and hundreds on a big roof somewhere in Scotland, Wales, wherever, you couldn't do that. I can go up on my own, clap my hands, and that's it. That's nowhere near enough. So it just means there is proportionality there, but it doesn't kind of say what the proportionality is, if it makes sense. So I still kind of think, but coming on to these kind of examples of goals, they've pretty much all been refuted anyway, so it did seem a moot argument. But just be careful now. Make sure everything you do when you're considering lethal methods, you tried everything non-lethal first, and it's proportional. If you want any advice on that, obviously, please let us know. The slide has moved on, please, David, to IBM, Integrated Bird Management. Yep. Thank you so much. So we're kind of very familiar with, in general, pest control, integrated pest management, of course. I don't know if IBM, International Business Machines, or integrated bird management. So, there's somebody there. Let's let that person in. So essentially, yeah, it means everything that David said. On the left-hand side, of course, we have to try educating because it's going to be hygiene sometimes. We can try proofing, obviously with no birds there. So it's non-lethal. We can try trap and release. You're quite legally right to actually trap a bird and release it. You wouldn't want to do it if you're doing it, but that's the case. And then I'm sure if this was kind of a smaller group and a real open forum, but by all means put in the Q&A and chat your opinions about some of these techniques here. Yeah,
there is a question that's popped up in there, Mark.
Go for it, pal. Go for
it. So referring, I think it was to the general license a moment ago. Is the license on a timer, i.e. days or hours?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll come on to that in terms of the licensing. So different parts of the UK, they're normally released for 1 calendar year. England was so confident they got it right, they actually released it for 2 calendar years, for 24 to 25. So unless there's some emergency or they're challenged again, there we go from the 1st of January to the end of the year. Same for a class license. For a personal license, the one that we get specifically for you, they will be issued to you for a limited period of time. So thank you for that. I'll go into that. So yeah, David will be given a specific license, an AO8, an AO9 for a starling in a non-food site for a week. So those would be very, very specific, and that's the same throughout the UK. So yeah, thank you for that. That's a good question. So these are the techniques. As I said, you probably got some comments about how effective a plastic owl is. There's starter pistols for alighting the birds, handheld lasers used safely for alighting the birds, fixed lasers. Birds of prey are absolutely awesome. I know we do have some professional users of birds of prey here, falconers. There was obviously trapping, alarm distress calls, handheld. I didn't deliberately put the gull on top of that fixed unit, by the way. That was just coincidental. There's gas cannons. Farmers use those a lot. Hawk kites can have limited effect when you're using it with falconry. And not that type of dog, but I know in the Republic of Ireland, I think Northern Ireland, dogs on the lead, under control, where they're not actually distressing goals, are a very good way of moving goals on. So lots of different things can be used together, but it's, obviously, it's very important not to just do one. To go up with a handheld alarm distress call when you've got hundreds of loafing goals will not be effective. So if you ever want advice, just let us know. We can give you a hand with that, but it's morally right, ethically right, and legally has to be done prior to considering lethal methods. So I hope that makes sense. So this one is scheduled onto a slide. I'm only showing England here more just to show how each one is delineated, but I'm going to go into each part of the UK and show the individual licenses. As I said, for England, they were so confident it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, doesn't it? They're running it for 2 years, and there's still some birds on there, like the Indian house crow, that should not be on the general license. But yeah, how we do it in each part of the UK is the general license that you don't have to apply for has a title that highlights the activity the bird could be doing that might consider you to need to move them on, if that makes sense. And it's worded differently in each part of the UK. So they're grouped together, but essentially mean the same. So the one that you would normally consider when going into your average site, in this case in England, but I'll show you each part of the UK, is GL41, second one down. So to take or kill certain birds to preserve public health. So public health is all the diseases, etc. that birds carry, 110 if not more. And public safety, so slip, trips and falls, and also goals are very aggressive. So those would be the kind of overriding reasons you might consider. And like I said, a bird looking at Mark not very nicely is not a reason. Because the fouling doesn't look nice is not a reason. Because a bird like a crow is pecking away at the putty or the mortar on a building, not a reason. They would never fall under these license considerations. So to give you an idea, there's also the one at the top with disease, damage to livestock, crops, etc. Probably not normally involved in that, I would guess. And that's the same in different parts of the UK. And wild birds, flora and fauna, again, word is slightly different in different parts of the UK, like bird breeders, etc. And I'll come on to the 2 class licenses afterwards. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of how they're delineated out.
A couple of questions popped up.
Go for it.
Do you want me just to throw these at you as we go? Is that best?
I would absolutely love you to. Thank you.
So the first one, if being called to a food manufacturer with a feral pigeon flying above open product, would you try to chase? You would try to chase out, but this has failed, and your falconer could not get on site for a day. There would be a significant risk to the product. Can the use of air rifle then go ahead, in your opinion?
Awesome, very good question. Thank you. I mean, this is a very high risk consideration. Obviously, you've tried everything. I would be glib to say try more, because normally you can chase a pigeon out with the use of handheld lasers, turn the lights up, banging bits of metal, chasing it, obviously not distressing it. If there is a risk to public health and public safety, which there probably would be from something like that, then yes, you might be able to consider lethal methods. But I would still take a step back and say, please try and persist with that, because a pigeon wants to be outside. It does not want to be inside. That's the bottom line, So you might be able to even temporarily trap it. Don't underestimate the fact of putting down a trap. But pigeons sometimes in those sort of circumstances can go in it quite quickly.
And the next question, Mark. Do you need a license to use a starting pistol?
Thank you for that. It's a very good question. To use a starting pistol to move on birds, no, but I know in Scotland they don't like you using them, and also even no matter how you make an Olympic starter pistol that's bright orange, looks like something out of a Judge Dredd film, it's still perceived as a pistol. So I would take local advice from the local constabulary just to make sure they're happy for you to use that, because I wouldn't want you to kind of use that and then somebody getting a call to say, and it's just a starter pistol. So yeah, there's no restrictions per se about using them to move on goals. Very common on landfill sites, but yeah, local advice, please. I said,
we'll do this last one, Mark, and then I'll let you get on with your slides, and I'll interrupt you again in a minute. Can you use GL41 to abate a noise nuisance?
Interesting. No. GL41, remind me of public. So come back onto that one. Public health and public safety. No, unfortunately. I know I was going to, my original slide was going to be the birds that annoy me the most. I thought that's not appropriate. So I was going to have, I find Canada geese slightly, swans, but we know they're highly protected, and gulls. Yeah, nothing worse than going somewhere in summer and having gulls waking you up. But no, unfortunately, that wouldn't be argued. So yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? But thank you for the questions. Really appreciate it. So coming on to kind of that scheduled on to Northern Ireland. These are laws that Northern Ireland has a general license to run for a whole year. So it started 1st of January, runs to the end of the year. This is TPG1. I won't dwell on it too long. The reason why I got the birds crossed out is to give you a sort of an idea of, I don't know, how long ago, so it was 5-6 years ago, when all the birds were on there, what you could control lethally. So yeah, quite a few birds crossed off now. You have the feral pigeon and the jackdaw for public health and public safety. And the order I've done it is actually the order that Wild Justice approached each part of the devolved UK. So Northern Ireland's, I think, the last where they challenged the laws. So Northern Ireland held out the longest. So that's for public health and public safety, listing the birds. Moving on to number 2. So this is for Northern Ireland, not Southern Ireland, of course. We've got the hooded crow, rook, and magpie, along with the wood pigeon. So obviously we've got the corvids on there, corvidae family, and 2 pigeons. And that's the reason why when David kindly kind of answered my slightly surreal question about identifying the pigeon family, because obviously wood pigeon's on there, feral pigeon's on there, but collared dove is not on there. So hence the reason why if you're doing trapping, quarter collared dove, what will we do? We'd release it. So that's really, really important about that. So this is prevention of disease, damage to livestock, crops, veg, and fruit. And if you kind of notice on that one, there's a similar classification for every other part of the UK. Not used that often, really. Can be for growers, can be for importing food. And this is wild birds. So if there's a sort of bird breeder, or if there's somebody else that does similar, yeah, we know that the hooded crow or the crow does predate. Same with the magpie. The Corvidae family do that. Gulls not so much, and of course pigeons don't. Hence the reason why they're taken off. So there's a bit of, I would say, common sense about taking certain birds off there. But even so just be really careful. So just because these 2 birds are on there doesn't mean you can proceed straight to lethal methods. That's what David said. So that's Northern Ireland. Scotland did also resist the challenges to the law, and Scottish bird law was always the one I always said was the most fantastic. If there's one that was my kind of most objective throughout the UK, Scotland was awesome. But I know now that there has been some retrenching back on issuing of licenses for gulls, etc. So it's become quite similar to the rest of the parts of the UK. I'm kind of looking at changes. This is one for the wild birds. So for Scotland, GL01, which is this one here, and the next one, GL02. And we're kind of getting back almost to pedantic changes now, which I kind of like. So on this one here, where they're saying about an authorized person must use the permitted method, it's now for must to should. So yeah, quite esoteric, but just changing it slightly. And again, you can see the Corvidae family are on here because it's wild birds, Canada goose, and also the ruddy duck. That's on there as well. So not used that often. And oops, so this is damage to livestock. The livestock's foods, crops, veg, and fruit. So obviously this is more arable, etc., but also kind of growers. And it's exactly the same as I mentioned on the last one. It's gone from must to should. The woodie's been added onto here, of course, because it's foodstuffs. Canada goose is on here, of course. Feral pigeons on there. Grey lag causes massive decimation of crops, and the corvids are on here as well. So you may not use it this much, but you might. So this is kind of the 2 that are not that common on the general licenses. And the one for public health and public safety has had a lot of the birds taken off there. We have, I'd say, the 2 obvious ones. Canada geese haven't been in Scotland for that long. Obviously came originally from Canada and came into the UK and then kind of moved probably from England into Scotland. Do cause massive destruction, quite vicious as well, been chased a few times. But for public health and public safety, due to the disease, due to the risk, we've only got the feral pigeon and Canada goose on here. And as we know, Canada geese, yeah, a lot of you might trap or do other or shooting with feral pigeons if it's justified, etc. Canada geese is different. So I would say if you've never done it before, please take advice. We can help you with that and go to a company that's very, very adept in doing that. And Scotland has revoked, quite rightly, I think, the license that was for air safety. And now if you want one, or if there's reasons to do that for air safety, you would specifically apply to Nature's Scott. Nature's Scott. So lots of birds on there, but going in to do lethal methods in an airport, yeah, there could be 10,000 oyster catchers. There used to be thousands of lapwings in John Lennon Airport, thousands of, we used to live near Gatwick, starlings. What do you do? Where do you start? So it was a bit erroneous to have it on there. So that was revoked, but there was still an option to apply directly. Moving on to Wales. England is the most complex law ever now. They made it super complicated. Wales has kind of gone a little bit more complicated. What they've done, they've actually been exact in the reasons why for different birds. This is damage and disease. It's kind of crops and vegetables, etc. The one I mentioned. So they've actually been quite specific to each of these birds here. So Canada geese, just for crops, fruit and veg. But they've not got disease on there, whereas wood pigeon is. And also the feral pigeon is. So there's a little bit of a difference here, but basically we've got the crow, woody, jackdaw, feral pigeon, and Canada goose. So you might not get involved in this, but there is a license, GL1, in Wales from Natural Resources Wales that you would basically use. You don't have to apply for. And we get less birds. So public health and public safety, Canada geese generally not so much of a problem in Wales, but if you did have an issue, you'd still apply directly. So Natural Resources Wales, we just have the feral pigeon, which obviously we know causes risks to public health and public safety. So it's kind of a reassurance it's still on there, which is really good. And wild birds, the carrion crow, which we do know as well, omnivorous, do attack, and do take chicks and eggs. Not very nice. So that is the reason why it's on there. The air safety one for Wales was also revoked. So again, if you do have any issues in any of the airports, Cardiff Airport, you would go direct to Natural Resources Wales and apply for a specific license for yourself. And I go into that on that one there. So we've kind of gone through Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales both had a lot of changes. As I mentioned, for the one on Northern Ireland, lots of birds taken off. And coming on to the how unusual complexities of English law. This is the one for flora and fauna. The reason why I show this first is because it's the first license, GL 40. They're numbered differently, but still flora and fauna. I've crossed out the rook because kind of obvious rooks live in rookeries and just mind their own business normally. But the other corvids are on there for the reasons I mentioned before. And I don't know if I'm being cynical, but to have the sacred ibis and the Indian house crow still on there, when there's only a couple of sites throughout the UK, it does seem a bit, yeah, it's general license. It's kind of the main birds. Parakeets are on there. If you've ever had any dealings with parakeets, they're a bit like a hamster. They do look cute, but if you get one on the end of your finger, they're and they decimate crops, trees, rare plants. They go into air bricks. They chew everything. So they might look cute, but they're not. Excuse me. And of course, we've got Canada geese on there. And the reason why I put on their complex inclusions, so some of them are tick for wild birds, some are tick for flora, some are tick for flora. Because this is quite unusual, this license. I've not bored you with all the different kind of that and that and that. I can send you the details for that so you have it. But those are the birds that are on there. The obvious ones, I suppose. Egyptian geese get locked up in Yorkshire, near where I live, so they're up there. The one that you probably use or consider, forgive me, the most, and again, England's specifically kind of delineated for the public health and public safety. This again runs for 2 years, so not the same as the rest of the UK. Here we say about slips, trips, falls, and nesting. So feral pigeon, slips, disease, and nesting. Jackdaws, obviously, it's not the nests that cause issues, nests only. And you've got the two ones again for Canada geese and monk parakeets. So yeah, just kind of some differences between England and the rest of the UK and how it's divided up. And this is kind of a general recommendation, really. The trade bodies do recommend that you keep a record of your actions. And that's obvious when you actually fill in your treatment report or your RAMs when you've finished, but also do keep a separate record somewhere else. And that way, if it comes back that it gets challenged, which may happen, you've done nothing wrong, but you have records there. So I do strongly advise that to keep your records. A good way of doing it. So that's moved on. Let's move on to there. So this has got the complexity again. So this is kind of the livestock. So if somebody's basically got cows, they might get mired or lambs particularly by carrion crow. Unfortunately, it's their foodstuffs. It could be crops that are growing. It could be fisheries. There's some amazing fisheries up in Scotland, particularly. Yeah, some of these birds would just love it, and inland waters. So again, there's lots of little complexities. Some are ticked, some are not. But just give you an idea of the birds, really. The corvids, and this one we've got the wood pigeon on here for obvious reasons because it's food. Canada geese, obviously an Egyptian goose near me. So we've got some extra ones on here this time, but it's quite specific, so I won't go into that. That's kind of the general licenses, each of the 4 parts of the UK. And then there's kind of the what else. There's obviously going to be lots of different scenarios that are not covered. So let me come on to this. And this is kind of, if it moves on. I've had this slide for quite a long time. Some of you might remember some of these from way back. It's, as you've seen, goals have been taken off the licensing, kind of post-Packham, if I want to call it that, sort of over the last 4 or 5 years. So that means, and quite rightly, I think in some circumstances, people were just doing lethal methods against eggs and nests for different reasons and controlling the population. A net could have been put over the top of a roof far cheaper. So some circumstances it's right, but obviously goals do cause massive damage. They do attack. The nests block gullies, which can cause a lot of issues, even could cause a fire potentially. So there is reasons to remove eggs and nests of goals. But currently what you have to do, and instead I've put on here a little kind of overview, different parts of the UK, you have to apply in a different way. So Scotland, it's a goal license. Wales, it's the very interestingly named AFB01, kind of cool. Northern Ireland, you've got a wildlife license. In England, you have the A08 or A09, depending on what the birds are doing, normally the A08. It's a protracted process. In my view, it sometimes might take a bit long. So by the time you actually get the license, if you've got one, and very few have actually been given out, as far as I've seen, I know people that have got them, it's too late to use them anyway. Yeah, the goals have already fledged. So my advice is if you are applying for anything on goals, get in very early, get a silly amount of data, like anything you can, photos, GPS coordinates, statements, get your customer to send it in because for some reason they don't seem to trust us. They do trust an end user. And then wait for questions and then try and do it as most timely as you can. So people have got them, but it tends to be for, I mean, you probably got examples yourself, forgive me, but it tends to be for a specific risk to a specific person. There's a high risk, and it's been given for that for a short period of time to answer that question earlier, a very short period of time. But it's not just goals. I've got the 3 goals on there, herring, lesser, and greater white-backed gull. It could also be for, I know people recently got one for a wood pigeon. Wood pigeon was causing an issue in a power station, a massive risk of fire. And of course, it's not included for public health and public safety in the relevant part of the UK. So they applied for it. There was lots of questions. Yeah, why do you want 3 wood pigeons rather than 2? It's kind of things like that. But they did get it. They did get it. So please, if you want any sort of advice on this, I want a hand filling in confidence, but don't be deterred. Particularly for non-goals, I've known quite a few people get them for the right reasons. As I said before, Scotland was awesome at giving them out for the right reasons, but it's kind of changed a little bit, but it's still there. And you'll get it. And that would be specific to you, as somebody kindly asked. So I would get a license for example, 2 weeks for doing a certain technique. And if an extra, I had it once for a robin. I keep going back to robins, don't I? But I had one once for robins years ago when I worked for National Britannia in Yorkshire. And yeah, I had one robin, but then the second one come in and it's like, I can't deal with that one. So it's very specific, very, very specific. And yeah, I think sooner or later, there will be a change, I hope, in relation to goals, but I've not seen it so far after 5 years. So I live in hope. Hope that makes sense. Oh, could you let Tim in, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
There is a question here, Mark, as well.
Go for it. Go for it.
So where can we find guidelines and legislation on the trap and release? For example, types of trap allowable, species allowable, duration bird can be held before release, and distance bird can be released from catch site.
Good question. Well, here's an example here, and thank you for that question. If you don't mind, I'll do it for England because it's easier. But each part of the devolved nations would have it from the relevant part. So DAERA would, I can send it to you as well. Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scot, and Natural England. But Natural England's kind of gone it a step further. I mean, I had the issue where, yeah, there was a robin in the food site. fouling, of course, doing stuff that was causing risk to public health and public safety. And people were like, it's only small, yeah, but it's still fouling. It took so long to actually get the personal specific license for me, and this was happening all the time in supermarkets, food manufacturers, etc. So they brought out a specific class license, and the class license is food. There's also one for aviation, and this is for trap and release. And they're quite they're quite sneaky about not giving specific guidelines sometimes about how far away to release it. But we can help you with that. But essentially, this is actually for once quite an easy process to do. Get your customer to do it. They would register the site. So Pelsys and Nesbit, but it has to be purely food. It can't be like our office where we have some charity sweet boxes. And that's food. No, it has to be a food manufacturer, food packaging, but purely food packaging. I went to one 2 days ago, or similar. I hope that makes sense. Just be really careful about that. And the bird has to be released alive and unharmed. Alive and unharmed. And yeah, you you need to get a decent distance away, because maybe the one I released that time 20 odd years ago may have come back. So they do have very good homing situ birds. So be careful. This is one of the kind of changes that was added on to this year anyway. The class license free for England was the addition of the carrion crow, the magpie, and the wood pigeon. And normally governments add stuff on because there's been a specific issue. So that's been added on there. Wales, it's been taken off. It used to be GL16, but it's not specific now. But in every part of the UK, there is still that kind of provision to consider trap and release. And to be honest, if you trap and release a feral pigeon, you can just trap and release it because you're unharming it. There's no harm to it at all. So, but just be careful, it will come back in again. So that's the kind of one thing you've got to do, i.e. do the techniques that kind of I discussed with David earlier about ensuring the bird doesn't come back in, which is hard. And yeah, thank you for the person that kind of mentioned this to me. They know who they are. Mist netting. I'm sure some of you have probably heard of this. It was an old presentation. I had a ticket for doing mist netting, gosh, way back in National Britannia in London, and now it's not. All the tickets were revoked for people in our industry, but people still do it. It's mainly for ringing. So you catch a bird, you ring it, you release it, you can track it. And this is an example of a mist net. It gets strung up on 2 poles. The bird doesn't actually perceive it. It goes into the mist net and gets trapped in these little pockets, kind of hard to describe. The bird's not harmed. It just quietens down a bit like my robin on the second slide. And then you are trained, and it's a highly regulated area. You are trained to release this bird afterwards outside because it's quite hard to do so. And those birds are fragile. So mist netting, you do need your ticket and your hours spent doing it. But there are people that in our industry or allied industries can do it for you. So if you want to know that, then please ask. But mist netting, it's awesome. Used around the world. I can't buy the nets. The sale of the nets is also highly regulated as well, quite rightly, which is really good. Yeah, this is, I mean, just kind of that was the mist netting on the back of applying, particularly with food. That's where it's mainly used, as mist netting in food areas. And this is a class license for England, kind of finish off CO12. Yeah, the collar dove was taken off. Fair enough. But with both of these, both for the food and also the air safety, you have to do a return. So as well as the site being registered, you have to go back and say, okay, I've trapped and released number of lapwings, which would be unlikely, but you know what I mean. And this one, if you ever do it, which I know is hardly ever, if at all, there's various distances away from the aerodrome. So I put 2 little examples on there, about 250 meters and 13 kilometers. But actually, kind of taking a step back, somebody I knew, or a couple of people I know actually, used this, and also each part of the UK as well, for a bird strike mitigation plan. So you know that if there's a number of gulls on a roof next to an airport, let's say Glasgow Airport, a plane takes off or something else, a large bang, startles the gulls, there could be a risk of going into a plane engine and causing a risk. So every site within a certain vicinity, depending on where you are in the UK, of an airport has to have this bird strike mitigation plan. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to do anything about it, but they do need to. And believe me, depending on where you are, but people from the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, do go around and check. So yeah, that could be a little technique you might be able to use. Who's an authorized person? I'm sure you've known this, and essentially you get authorization from the owner of the building, but the owner might be actually in Luxembourg, or the person authorized under that. So what I normally say is the owner could be based anywhere. They give it to somebody like Land Securities. Land Securities then give it down to a cleaning company. The cleaning company give it to you, the installer, falconer, pest controller, to say, yeah, you can use lethal methods, i.e. use of air rifles or etc. So if you've got any doubt, I always use that example of the Christmas pop-up shop, where they're there for 2 weeks and they say, yeah, Mark, crack on, do what you need to do. And I've justified the use of lethal methods. Just be really careful, because they probably don't have the authorization to get it to you. And always get it in writing. Always get it from your customer to say, yes, you can do this on site. Hope that makes sense. A couple of kind of key takeaways from here. And yeah, I said I quite like reading general licenses, because they're really nicely written, and they got some interesting stuff on that you probably saw on the top, Sarah, about the triple SI sites. So if you are working in an area and you've got some doubt that, yeah, I'm kind of in the country, yeah, this could be, could be a risk here, then type in the postcode of where you're working, see what it brings up, and each of the licenses has a link for the triple SI part. So that's quite new over the last couple of years. I'll come on to trapping, but there's some very specifics on what you can and can't do, depending on where you are in the UK. Northern Ireland doesn't have a lot of detail. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think I always like to have detail. But some of the differences are illuminating devices. So a torch. I wouldn't use a flaming branch, but a torch or similar. You can, in certain parts of the UK, use that. And cage trapping particularly has a lot of, particularly for feral pigeons, guidance. Like in England, there's specific guidance. Scotland does as well. And essentially it means, as an overall, this is not legal, by the way, that a bird has to be able to do its behavior in the trap, and it shouldn't come to harm whilst in the trap. So that's the reason why we say food, water, inclement weather, take the trap down, you know what I mean? But Scotland and Wales is more advice. You have to get a tag that has the number of the trap and your details on there. So if somebody finds a trap, quite hard to do when it's on top of a building, they can see that it's been approved properly. Coming back to a question earlier about the pigeon, you can catch a bird in a net as long as it's in your hand. So if you have a fishing net and the pigeon's running away from you, you can pull it back as long as it's not being harmed. That's the key thing. You can't throw a net over the birds. You can't use mist nets unless you're fully trained, if that makes sense. And on these two here, nests and eggs, when I showed you the birds, I showed you the adult bird. That does mean all stages of the life cycle. So the feral pigeon's on there, you can remove its nests, you can remove its eggs, but you still have to justify it the same, particularly the eggs and juveniles. Particularly eggs and juveniles. That's that. Animal welfare. I've already mentioned this about Animal Welfare Act, and there's some other sort of esoterics, but just be, if you have any doubt, please don't. Please treat, I suppose, anytime you come into contact with the birds that we're kind of talking about, as if it's your pet, as if it's your family. I know it's a bit of a strange example, but if you remember something, please do that. There's some sort of caveats under the Wildlife and Countryside Act about things you can't do. And it's quite specific about intentional, but also unintentional. I think that's really specific. So for the guys that kind of do netting, there's best practice about how often the fixings are put in. Why is that? Well, it means that a net should be tight to the substrate so a bird can't get behind and get trapped. And that's a reason for it. Not to use more fixings or drill the wall more. It's about bird behavior and ensuring there's animal welfare, bird welfare. And there's specific ones that are kind of banned. Obviously, poisons can't be used anymore. I used to use them way back, and narcotizing. Narcotizing is used, but mainly if avian influenza, etc. So yeah, just be really careful. You cannot do anything untoward to a bird. If it's in a trap, doesn't matter. And I've already mentioned about this. So this kind of used to be known as special personal licenses. That's the one I showed you on the slide, to do with goals, and that's different in each part of the UK, but essentially it's the same. It's given to me for a limited period of time for that. And it's very, very rarely. I was going to put a very, very, very rarely on there, but they're given out only once specifically. But I chatted to somebody yesterday. I was 2 days ago, forgive me, and it was about whether they could get one. And yeah, you'd normally fill in the relevant form. But if you need something, because a bird's in distress, it's not covered by the licenses, phone up the relevant part of the UK, phone up the licensing authority to discuss it. I've done it before. I phoned up the team in Bristol for England. I've discussed it, and they've been, oh my gosh, send me some photos I did, and they said, okay, you can proceed with caution, with evidence afterwards. They're good with that because again, it's the animal, the bird, that's key for them. That's key for them.
Another question here, Mark. Can I
go for it, David? Go for it.
So as lethal control of jackdaws is only allowable under GL 41 for the purpose of preventing nesting, would shooting under this license of a jackdaw out of nesting season not be allowable?
Never been asked that before, but I would say yes. It wouldn't, sorry, double negative there. I don't think it would be allowed because it's not nesting. So, you know, it's only specifically with nesting. In theory, the jackdaw could nest elsewhere. And I think you'd probably be held to account. My thoughts would be that if it was in the chimney one year, why wasn't the chimney blocked? I mean, that's a very vague brushstroke, but I would just say, yeah, just be really, really careful. You need intent. It's kind of like, I'm guessing, forgive me for the poor analogy, shooting a goal with intent, they might come back to the same roof next year. So I would just say, please don't. Please, please don't. Yeah. Too much risk. But thank you for the question. Thank you. Yeah, I thought there's too much writing, so I've put some silly pictures in here, forgive me. So the picture on the right-hand side, you've probably all seen before, and it's the infamous one for Trafalgar Square. And oh yeah, I used to feed the pigeons back in the day. Of course you have to. Yeah, pigeons are tough. Pigeons are protected. Nobody thinks that, you know, nobody likes rats, but actually everybody likes pigeons. So there's no kind of gangster pigeon. And yeah, nice little picture on the left-hand side. I pulled off the web where, yeah, everybody feeds them. So just be really careful. If it doesn't feel right what you're doing, I keep saying this, forgive me, don't. Come back at a different time, do it a different way, or just refuse the work. I know that might sound a bit punishing, but just refuse the work because it does upset people. And I'm sure some of you have got stories about people, yeah, the friendly person on site then taking photographs and, yeah, superimposing something really bad on the photo. So, yeah, just be really careful. It doesn't happen that often, but my supposition is that there might be certain parts of the establishment, is that the right way of putting it, that might be looking to make an example. I wouldn't like that to be yourself. So just be really careful, please. Kind of getting towards the end, so I wanted to show you this. So there's not been many changes, as I mentioned, throughout the UK. And I said I can go down, I wouldn't say rabbit hole because that's a different topic, but a pigeonhole on different types of trapping, etc. But I just kind of wanted to show you this. I've already mentioned about trapping. There is different guidelines, some of them are a little bit vague still, for pigeon trapping throughout the UK. But so the overriding thing is the bird has to be safe, secure, unharmed in that trap. So the picture on top right is some snow buntings, really cute birds in snow, of course. If it was snowing or cold or super hot, like we've had a couple of summers, you shouldn't be trapping. Yeah, the bird could come to serious harm from being in the trap. That's not allowed. That's an Animal Welfare Act. A trap needs food and water because it needs to have its own behavior. And for something I was involved in, some very learned scientists proved that a feral pigeon in reasonable warmth, you know, an average summer, might only live for a couple of days without food and water. So it's really implicit that these traps, when you're doing pigeon trapping, are checked regularly. It does vary throughout the UK. Northern Ireland hasn't got specific guidelines, but we have historically had the guideline of 24 hours. So the trap must be checked a maximum of 24 hours, not every day. And also there's this kind of caveat of an hour after sunset, an hour before sunrise, and you can't trap on a Sunday. It's very specific to Northern Ireland, not Southern Ireland. Scotland, again, there's no specifics, but 24 hours has been the overriding for a long time. I know some of you check your traps twice a day. So I mentioned in Scotland, you do have to register traps and get the ID number. In Wales, it's kind of advised. And England and Wales have changed. So it used to be every day, and every day could almost, if you think about this kind of in a strange way, check the traps every day could almost be 48 hours. So they realized that, so they made the check into the trap a maximum of 24 hours. But then, if you I used to do trapping in Brixton Prison, and I used to love that, gosh. Yeah, you used to go in at, say, 8 o'clock on the first day, and you had to go in before 24 hours. So I was getting earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. And in the end, it was like, Mark, you can't come at 6 in the morning. It's not right. So they're given that kind of caveat of 25 hours maximum for England and Wales. But I said some of you do go twice a day. And that's kind of the overview. Traps have to be big enough for a bird to have its own behavior. And some of you make your own traps. And a different kind of discussion, but the dispatch of a feral pigeon in the trap has to be quick and humane. And I'll leave it at that. So quick and humane. You cannot leave in a cute pigeon as a call bird like you would in a Larsen trap. Every pigeon has to be removed. And if you do get a non-target, like a wood pigeon, and it's not covered by that license, you're not trapping it, has to be released. So I won't go into too much detail on pigeon trapping for time, but that's the example there. And Scotland has had some changes. And mainly on the Larsen trapping for corvids. I don't know if any of you do it. Corvids, sorry, Larsen traps used quite a lot for crows. And it's all about registering decoy birds. So in the center of the Larsen trap, you have the decoy bird that calls in the other birds. It's territorial. Because of the risk of avian influenza, and it's swept throughout the UK at various times, they want to keep a track of all birds that are held. And of course, when a call bird is in the trap and it's kept in there for a period of time, it's a held bird. So you just have to register it with the Scottish Kept Bird Register. There we go. And also in Scotland, they've added on, which has been in kind of the rest of the UK for a long time, so I was quite surprised about that, but you can use an illuminating device for night shooting. So that's been the same for the rest of the UK for a long time. So a few little changes in Scotland, all very positive, which is good because I know Scotland's tightened up on general licensing quite a lot. And I've chatted to a few of you, including my colleague John Stewart, about that. And I wanted to kind of finish on this really, and hopefully you can see this. Just to really highlight, and I don't know, I was just out with somebody and I took some photos about this. Is just a fantastic diligence. And I'll just spend a minute on this, but essentially a very complex roof structure, lots of air handling units, lots of different places for pigeons to go. And I would say, always ask yourself, if you are doing proofing, can you guarantee 100% that there are no birds still in there? If there are still birds in there after you've netted it, could that area under law be considered a trap, an unintentional trap at that? So just got to really step back about the fantastic things that they did here. I won't say where it is nor who did it, but pretty awesome. There's a zip there, so they can get back in, not just for the maintenance, but also for the future. If there was, and what they did, they came back 12 hours after the netting, 24 hours after the netting, a day after the netting to recheck, and that zip also would aid them releasing any birds. There wasn't any birds in there. Their installation met all the criteria of best practice as laid down by the trade associations, us and other suppliers about how often it should be installed. Fantastic installation, really fantastic. And also they put this in here. You can't really see, but there's man handling units above. I'm rubbish at taking photos, forgive me. So air handling units above. They've actually also put some escape hatches in. So there's ways that if there was, which there wasn't a bird in there, they could escape as well. So some real due diligence. Let me come on to the final slide. Real due diligence. And the reason why spikes in there is because initially you just had pigeons sitting on the outer edge of those pipes and leading edges. They got onto the tops of the ducting, so they netted off. So some really fantastic kind of, just in case, let's put it in there, let's revisit back, and you might put in there on a bridge or something else, an extra revisit or free within the monies of the job to come back and recheck. So I thought that was kind of fantastic. So just going to make you aware that this installer was thinking about everything I've gone through before, justified everything. There's no lethal methods, by the way, but just in case they had it in there. So yeah, really good example. Thank you so much. That is me. By all means, if you know me, I love chatting about anything, particularly birds and other stuff. So if you don't have a number already, take it down, give me a call. There's no charge. Send an email to me. Social media, I'm on there, but yeah, just keep in contact really. Or yeah, the guys in Palses. I'm just going to stop sharing this. I'm a bit more in front of people. So hope you found that useful. Reminder. Enlightening, maybe some things you didn't know about before, but about the history of bird law, and you've seen some gangster pictures of gangster pigeons, so that's always good, isn't it? So. Any final questions, team?
Just having a look. one querying where can they view the recording. So I'll let Linda respond to that one. People are dropping off. Great presentation, thank you. Awesome, thanks, Mark. No other questions popping up, just lots of thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Well, lovely meeting you all. And so normally I'd like to go around the room and say, how are you all? But hope you have a fantastic rest of July. Good day, and let me know directly about what you'd like for the next one. That's assuming you want to see me again, which I can't blame you if you don't want to. So yeah, take care.
Can I just say I will download the recording. I'll ask Cameron to download the recording if we can, and then we'll get it sent out.
That's one. Well, I will say have a good rest of the day. And I'm going to go off and yeah. So good seeing you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.